You have 3 days to leave. This is my house now. Let's see who the real homeowner is.
My ex-husband's new wife knocked on my door, holding eviction papers with my name on them. "You have 3 days to leave," she said, smiling like she'd already won. I looked at her, then at my house, and something didn't feel right. Because if what she said was true, then how was I still the legal owner? My name is Emma Carter, and until that morning, my life had finally started to feel quiet. At 32, I had learned the hard way how fragile, stable could be. I was a freelance interior designer, working from home in a 2-story suburban house just outside Seattle. Soft grey siding, wide front porch, and hydrangeas I'd planted myself after the divorce. That house wasn't just a place. It was the one thing I had fought to keep when everything else fell apart. Daniel Carter, my ex-husband, was the kind of man people trusted too easily. Tall, lean, always dressed just a little too sharp for casual settings, with sandy blonde hair he kept perfectly styled, and a smile that could disarm anyone in seconds. When we first met, he was charming, attentive, ambitious. But ambition has a way of mutating. After his startup failed 3 years ago, something shifted. He became restless, secretive, obsessed with big moves and quick money. The divorce came quietly, but not cleanly. At least, that's what I thought. That morning, I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at my laptop screen. An email sat unopened in my inbox. Subject line, "Property Ownership Update." I'd noticed it 2 days ago but ignored it, assuming it was some automated nonsense. I had deadlines, clients, a life to rebuild. Legal spam wasn't high on my priority list. Then came the knock. Not hesitant, not polite, sharp, deliberate. 3 times. I frowned, setting the mug down, and walked to the door. The moment I opened it, something in my chest tightened. She looked out of place. About 26, maybe younger. White, with long, perfectly straight blonde hair that fell like glass over her shoulders. Her makeup was flawless, soft glam, expensive looking. She wore a tailored beige blazer and matching skirt, heels too polished for a quiet neighborhood like mine. Everything about her screamed confidence, or at least the performance of it. And then there was the smile. Not warm, not friendly. Smug. "Emma Carter?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I didn't answer right away. "Yes, and you are?" She let out a small breath, almost amused, then lifted a set of papers in her hand. "My name is Chloe," she said. "I'm Daniel's wife." The word hit harder than I expected. Wife. So that was fast. Before I could respond, she extended the papers towards me. "You need to be out by Friday." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. "Excuse me?" She stepped half a pace closer, heels clicking against the wood of my porch, and pressed the documents forward with more insistence. "These are eviction papers," she said, her tone calm, almost bored. "The house has been transferred. You're no longer the legal occupant." I took the papers slowly, my fingers brushing against the crisp edge. Official looking, stamped, signed. But something didn't sit right. I looked up at her, really looked this time. The confidence in her posture, the certainty in her eyes. It wasn't just arrogance, it was belief. She thought she was right. Behind her, across the street, I noticed Mrs. Whitmore standing by her mailbox. 68, small frame, silver hair always tied into a loose bun. She wore her usual pale blue cardigan, hands gripping the edge of the mailbox as she watched us. Her face tightened when our eyes met. Worried. That made two of us. I glanced back down at the papers. Transferred, I repeated slowly. Chloe's smile widened just slightly. Yes, she said. Daniel made sure everything was handled. Daniel. Of course he did. A flicker of memory surfaced, the unopened email, the subject line, the timing. Property ownership update. My stomach dropped, but not in fear, in recognition. I let out a small, almost involuntary laugh. Chloe blinked, clearly not expecting that. You think this is funny? She asked, her voice sharpening. I looked at her, then past her, at my house. The porch I repainted, the windows I replaced, the life I rebuilt piece by piece. Then back at her. No, I said quietly. But I do think you've been told a story that isn't true. For the first time, her expression faltered. Just a crack. And in that crack, I saw it clearly. This wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't close the door immediately after Chloe's last words. Instead, I stepped back just enough to let the morning light hit the papers more clearly, my eyes scanning every line. The formatting looked official at first glance. Clean margins, legal language, even a stamped seal. But the more I read, the more the cracks began to show. The property ID number was slightly off, 1 digit too many. The issuing authority listed a county office that didn't even handle residential disputes. And the signature, it was printed, not inked. Subtle mistakes, but not small ones. I had spent years dealing with contracts as a designer. Details like this weren't invisible to me. Is there a problem? Chloe asked, her tone tightening. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight impatiently. Up close, I could see the tension beneath her polished exterior. Her jaw clenched slightly, her eyes flicking between my face and the papers, like she was waiting for a reaction she wasn't getting. I looked up, calm. Yeah, I said. There is. Her smile faltered again, just a little. I'm not going anywhere, I added. That did it. Her posture stiffened, confidence cracking into irritation. You don't seem to understand, she snapped, her voice sharper now. This is legal. Daniel made sure of that. Daniel. Again. Always Daniel. I tilted my head slightly. Did he? I asked. For a moment, she didn't answer. And in that silence, something shifted. Not enough for her to doubt him, but enough for me to notice she had never actually questioned any of this herself. Before she could respond, a soft but urgent voice called from across the yard. Emma? I turned to see Mrs. Whitmore hurrying towards us, faster than I had ever seen her move. Up close, she looked more fragile than usual, her pale skin drawn tight, her silver hair slightly messier than normal. She clutched a folded set of papers in her trembling hands. Emma, She stopped when she saw Chloe, her expression tightening. Oh, I see I'm not the only one. Chloe frowned. Excuse me? Mrs. Whitmore ignored her and handed me the papers. These came this morning, she said quietly. They're saying I have to vacate too. I unfolded them quickly. Same structure, same formatting, same errors. My stomach dropped, but this time not from shock. From clarity. This wasn't personal. This was a pattern. Where did you get these? I asked her gently. They were taped to my door, she replied. No name, no one I could ask. Behind me, I heard Chloe shift again, less confident now. That doesn't have anything to do with this, she said quickly. Too quickly. I turned back to her slowly. Actually, I said, holding up both sets of papers side by side, It has everything to do with this. For the first time, she didn't argue, didn't interrupt. She just stared. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. Pieces were starting to connect now, but I needed more than instinct. I needed proof. And there was only one way to get that. I stepped back inside, reaching for my phone on the kitchen counter. My contact list scrolled for a second before I stopped on a familiar name. Rachel Stein. Rachel was in her late 30s, sharp-featured, with short, dark hair, always tucked neatly behind one ear. The kind of woman who never wasted a word. We had met years ago through a client dispute she helped me win. Since then, she had built a reputation as someone who didn't just understand the law, she knew how people twisted it. She answered on the second ring. "Emma," she said, her voice steady. "This better be interesting." I glanced at the eviction papers again, then at Chloe still standing rigidly in my doorway, and Mrs. Whitmore beside me, clearly shaken. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think it is." Rachel arrived faster than I expected, 20 minutes, maybe less. She stepped out of a dark grey sedan with the same controlled energy I remembered. Mid-30s, sharp jawline, pale skin, short black hair tucked neatly behind one ear, dressed in a navy blazer that looked expensive but practical. Rachel Stein wasn't just a lawyer. She was the kind of person who had built her career on catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. She didn't waste time with greetings. Her eyes went straight to the papers in my hand. She scanned them in silence, her expression unreadable, then let out a quiet breath that wasn't quite surprise, more like confirmation. "These are fake," she said flatly, tapping the signature line. "Not even a good fake." She pointed out inconsistencies I hadn't noticed. Wrong court formatting, outdated legal phrasing, and a barcode that didn't correspond to any registered filing system. Behind me, I felt Chloe shift. When I turned, the confidence that had defined her earlier was gone, replaced by something fragile. She still stood tall, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty now, like someone realizing the ground beneath her wasn't solid after all. "That's not possible," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Daniel wouldn't..." She stopped herself. Rachel glanced at her briefly, assessing, then turned back to me. "Where is he right now?" she asked. "I don't know," I replied. "We haven't spoken in weeks." Rachel nodded, as if that answer fit too neatly into something she was already building in her mind. "Then we start with paper trails," she said. "People like this always leave one." We moved inside, spreading the documents across my dining table. Chloe hesitated at the doorway before stepping in, her heels quieter now, less certain. Rachel pulled out her tablet and began cross-checking property records, her fingers moving quickly, efficiently. "There," she said after a moment, turning the screen toward me. A series of transactions appeared, transfers, shell entries, partial ownership filings, all tied to one name, Daniel Carter. But the amounts didn't make sense. Small deposits, then sudden spikes, then transfers to an unfamiliar entity. My stomach tightened. "What is that?" I asked. Rachel zoomed in. "A holding company," she said, or at least something pretending to be one. The name read North Ridge Holdings, LLC. It sounded legitimate. Too legitimate. That's what made it dangerous. Chloe leaned closer, her brows furrowing. "I've never heard of that," she whispered. "He never mentioned anything like this." Her voice was different now, quieter, almost defensive, but not toward me, toward the truth. Before I could respond, a soft knock echoed from the back door. Mrs. Whitmore stood there, clutching a worn leather folder. Up close, I could see her hands trembling more than before. "I found these," she said gently. "Old documents. from when my husband was still alive. Her husband had passed nearly 10 years ago, a loss that had left her more guarded, more careful with everything she owned. I took the folder and opened it. Inside were original property deeds, notarized signatures, and decades-old records that were far more legitimate than anything Chloe had brought. Rachel leaned in, her eyes narrowing with interest. "These matter," she said. "A lot." She carefully compared the signatures, the seals, the registration numbers. The difference was undeniable. One was real. The other was a fabrication trying to imitate authority. "This isn't random," Rachel added quietly. Whoever did this targeted people they thought wouldn't fight back. Her words hung in the air, heavy. I glanced at Mrs. Whitmore, small, alone, trusting. Then at Chloe, young, misled, standing in the middle of something she didn't understand. And then, inevitably, my mind went back to Daniel. Chloe took a step back, her composure slipping further. "He told me everything was settled," she said, almost to herself. "He said the house was his, that you agreed to it." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Daniel hadn't just lied. He had constructed an entire narrative, convincing enough to make her believe she was the one in control. "He needed you to believe that," I said quietly. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes no longer sharp, but searching. For the first time, she didn't look like my enemy. She looked like someone who had just realized she was part of a much bigger lie. Rachel closed the folder with a decisive motion. "We're not dealing with a misunderstanding," she said. "We're dealing with fraud." And in that moment, everything shifted, from confusion to truth. The moment Rachel said the word fraud, something inside me shifted from reacting to acting. And by the time she left that afternoon, I wasn't just defending my house anymore. I was starting to see the outline of something much bigger. I spent the next hour going through every document we had collected, cross-checking names, addresses, and formatting patterns, and that's when the realization hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't isolated. The structure of the fake eviction papers, the identical formatting, the repeated legal errors, they weren't sloppy mistakes. They were replicated, intentional, designed to be mass-produced. I opened my laptop and started searching local records, neighborhood forums, anything that might connect the dots, and within minutes, I found them. Posts buried in community threads, people confused, asking questions, describing nearly identical notices taped to their doors. Different names, same story. Behind me, Chloe stood near the kitchen island, unusually quiet. She had changed her posture completely, no longer leaning forward with confidence, now standing with her arms loosely wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. "He told me he was expanding his investments," she said slowly, her voice almost detached, like she was replaying conversations in her head. "Real estate, mostly. Said it was smart money." She let out a short, hollow laugh. "I thought he meant buying property, not stealing it." There was no arrogance left now, only confusion layered with something deeper, betrayal beginning to take shape. I didn't respond immediately, because part of me recognized that look. I had worn it before. Before I could say anything, my phone buzzed sharply against the table. Unknown number. I hesitated for a second, then answered. "Emma Carter?" a woman's voice asked, clear, steady, professional. "This is Laura Mitchell. I'm a reporter with the Seattle Tribune." I straightened slightly. "How did you get my number?" A brief pause. "Someone forwarded me a copy of your eviction notice," she said. "You're not the only one." Her tone wasn't intrusive. It was precise, controlled curiosity. Laura Mitchell sounded like someone in her early 40s, the kind of journalist who had seen enough to know when a story mattered. She continued, We've been tracking a pattern of fraudulent property claims across multiple neighborhoods. Same paperwork, same company name, North Ridge Holdings. My grip tightened around the phone. How many? I asked quietly. At least 7 confirmed cases, she replied. Possibly more. That was no longer a coincidence. That was a system. At that exact moment, the back door opened again, this time without a knock. Mrs. Whitmore stepped in, visibly shaken, her usual composure gone entirely. Her cardigan hung unevenly, and her breathing was slightly unsteady. "They came back," she said, her voice trembling. 2 men. Said I needed to sign papers immediately or I'd be removed. My chest tightened. "Did you sign anything?" I asked quickly. She shook her head. "No. I told them I needed time. They didn't like that." Rachel's earlier warning echoed in my mind. Target the vulnerable. Pressure them. Rush them. Break them before they ask questions. I helped her sit down, noticing how tightly she clutched her purse, like it was the only thing grounding her. I ended the call with Laura, but promised to follow up. Then I turned back to the room, to Chloe, to Mrs. Whitmore, to the scattered evidence on my table. The pieces were no longer abstract. They were real, immediate, dangerous. Chloe looked at me, her eyes searching now, no longer defensive. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I held her gaze for a moment, then looked down at the papers, at the company name, at Daniel's trail woven through everything like a shadow. "I'm going to prove it," I said. "All of it." Because at this point, it wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about everyone he thought he could outsmart. I didn't wait another day. By late afternoon, Rachel had traced a recent transaction tied to Daniel to a co-working office downtown. Glass building, polished lobby, the kind of place that rented credibility by the hour. I drove there with Chloe beside me, the silence between us heavy, but no longer hostile. When we stepped out, she looked different. Same tailored outfit, same flawless appearance, but her posture had shifted, shoulders slightly tense, like someone bracing for impact rather than expecting victory. "If he's there," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I didn't respond. I was already focused on the entrance, on the moment I had been waiting for since this started. We found him in a second-floor meeting room, visible through the glass wall. Daniel Carter looked exactly the same, and completely different. Late 30s, tall, lean, that same carefully styled sandy blonde hair, the same tailored navy suit he used to wear when he wanted to impress investors. But his movements were sharper now, more controlled, like someone constantly calculating. He was speaking to a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, stocky build, shaved head, wearing a cheap grey suit that didn't quite fit. The kind of man who looked uncomfortable in legitimate spaces. When Daniel saw me, he froze for half a second. That was all I needed to know. He hadn't expected this. "Emma," he said as we stepped in, his tone smooth, almost rehearsed. "This is unexpected." "You should try getting eviction papers at your own front door," I replied, keeping my voice steady. His gaze flicked briefly to Chloe, then back to me. "I assume this is some kind of misunderstanding." Rachel stepped in beside me, calm and precise as always. "Not likely," she said, placing a folder on the table. "We've reviewed the documents. They're fraudulent." Daniel didn't look at the folder. Instead, he leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, a faint smile forming. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "You should be careful with that." There it was, the version of him I remembered. The one who deflected, redirected, turned pressure into performance. "You transferred property rights through a shell entity," Rachel continued, unfazed. "North Ridge Holdings. Except the filings don't hold up under legal scrutiny. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then, just barely, it did. A flicker. A pause too long. "I don't handle the paperwork personally," he said. "I have people for that." I stepped closer. "Then maybe you should choose better people," I said quietly. "Because those same people are targeting multiple homeowners." He exhaled through his nose, like he was mildly annoyed now. "Emma, you're overreacting. This is business. Things get complicated." 7 confirmed cases, I shot back. Same documents, same company name, same tactics. Chloe spoke before he could answer. "You told me everything was clean," she said, her voice unsteady but firm. "You said you owned that house, that she signed it over." Daniel turned to her, and for the first time, his expression softened, but it wasn't warmth. It was control. "Chloe," he said gently, "you don't understand how these deals work." "No," she replied, shaking her head slightly. "I don't think I do. Because if this is what you call a deal..." She gestured toward the papers, toward me, toward everything. "Then you lied to me." Silence settled in the room. The man in the grey suit shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. He hadn't said a word the entire time, but his presence alone added weight to everything Daniel wasn't saying. I watched Daniel carefully. He was still composed, but not untouched. His fingers tapped once against the table, a small movement, a crack. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said finally, his tone tighter now. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "You already did that." And for the first time since I walked in, he didn't have an immediate response. The moment we stepped out of that glass office, I knew one thing for certain. Daniel wasn't going to confess. Not willingly. Men like him didn't collapse under pressure. They adapted, redirected, survived. Which meant if we wanted the truth, we couldn't chase it anymore. We had to make him walk into it. Rachel suggested the plan before I even finished the thought. "We give him an opportunity," she said, her tone precise, controlled as always. "Something he thinks he can manipulate." Chloe stood beside us, arms crossed tightly, her expression no longer confused, but hardened. The illusion was gone now. Whatever she felt for Daniel, it had been replaced by clarity. "He'll take it," she said quietly. "If he thinks he's still in control, he always does." That was the first time she sounded certain about him, not as a wife, but as someone who had finally seen the pattern beneath the charm. The next morning, we met at Rachel's office, a clean, minimal space on the 10th floor overlooking downtown, all glass and steel, designed for clarity, not comfort. That's where we were introduced to Ryan Brooks, a private investigator Rachel had worked with for years. Mid-40s, tall, slightly rugged with short dark hair touched by grey, he had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but never missed anything. His calm demeanour came from experience, years in corporate fraud investigations, tracking people who thought they were untouchable. "Your ex isn't sloppy," Ryan said after reviewing the files. "But he's confident. That's the opening." He explained the setup. Chloe would reach out to Daniel, tell him she was ready to finalise remaining transfers tied to the property. A meeting, controlled environment, recorded. Chloe hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Not out of fear, but because this would be the moment everything became irreversible. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady. And just like that, the trap was set. Meanwhile, Laura Mitchell called again. This time, her voice carried urgency beneath the professionalism. "We're running the story tomorrow," she said. "But if you have anything stronger, anything direct, it could change everything." I glanced at Rachel, then at Ryan. We were close, but not there yet. "Give me one more day," I said. "We'll have it." Laura paused, then replied, Then I'll hold the front page. That kind of leverage didn't come often. We couldn't waste it. That afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore arrived with something none of us expected. A small envelope, yellowed with age. "I remembered this," she said softly. Inside was a notarized amendment to her original property deed, signed decades ago by her late husband. Rachel's eyes sharpened immediately as she read it. This blocks unauthorized transfers unless verified in person," she said. "It means any attempt to move her property without direct consent is automatically invalid." More than that, it proved intent. Whoever drafted the fake documents either didn't know this clause existed or ignored it. Either way, it was a mistake. The next evening, everything aligned. Chloe sent the message. Daniel responded within minutes. Of course he did. Confidence again. Predictable. The meeting was set at a private office space, neutral ground. Ryan handled the technical setup, audio, backup recording, visual capture. Rachel prepared the legal framing. And me, I just watched the clock, feeling the weight of everything we were about to prove. Because this time, we weren't guessing anymore. We were waiting. The room was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. It felt controlled, like everything inside it was waiting for something to snap. Chloe sat across from Daniel, her posture composed but no longer soft. There was a firmness in the way she held herself now, like she had already made peace with whatever truth was about to surface. Daniel, on the other hand, looked exactly as he always had in moments like this. Calm, confident, calculating. Tall, lean, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him too perfectly, his sandy blonde hair still immaculate, his expression carefully neutral. But I had learned by now that his calm wasn't strength. It was strategy. Ryan stood just outside the room, monitoring everything through a discreet setup, audio feeds, backup recorders, visual confirmation. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning every detail like a man trained to catch the moment others missed. Rachel stood beside me, arms folded, her gaze fixed through the glass. "This is it," she said quietly. "He either walks out clean, or he doesn't walk out at all." Inside, Chloe spoke first. "You said everything was finalized," she said, her voice steady. "That the properties were already transferred." Daniel didn't hesitate. "They are," he replied smoothly. "You just needed to sign the remaining confirmations." "Even Mrs. Whitmore's?" Chloe asked. A pause, too small for most people to notice. Not for us. "That's just a formality," Daniel said. "She's not in a position to manage her assets anymore." That was the moment. Rachel nodded once toward Ryan. Ryan pressed a button. Inside the room, Chloe leaned forward slightly. "And Emma's house?" she continued. "You said she signed everything over after the divorce." Daniel exhaled lightly, as if amused. "Emma never reads anything carefully. That's always been her weakness." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not anymore. Just certainty. Ryan stepped in. 2 uniformed officers followed. Everything shifted instantly. Daniel stood up, his composure cracking for the first time. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice no longer smooth, but sharp. One of the officers, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a steady, practiced tone, stepped forward. "Daniel Carter, you are under investigation for fraud, attempted property seizure, and falsification of legal documents. You need to come with us." Silence hit like impact. Daniel looked at Chloe, then at me, then at Rachel, his mind moving fast, calculating exits that didn't exist anymore. "This is a mistake," he said quickly. "You don't have proof." Ryan stepped forward, holding up a small recording device. "We do now." For a brief second, Daniel said nothing. Then the fight drained out of him. Not completely, but enough. The officers moved in, placing him in cuffs. The sound was quiet. Final. Outside, the hallway began to fill, people drawn by the sudden shift in energy. Among them were faces I didn't recognize at first, but then it clicked. Homeowners, people from the forums, people who had been targeted the same way. One woman stepped forward, mid-50s, short brown hair, eyes tired but determined. "He tried the same thing with me," she said. Another voice followed, then another. The story was no longer hidden. It was visible, loud, unavoidable. Behind me, Chloe sank into the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the space where Daniel had been standing. The strength she had held onto throughout the plan finally gave way, not into panic, but into something heavier. Reality. "I didn't know," she whispered. I walked over slowly, sitting beside her. For a moment, I didn't say anything, because there was nothing simple about what she was feeling. "I believe you," I said finally. She looked at me, eyes glassy but clear. "I thought I knew him." I nodded. So did I. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal, but realizing how convincing the lie had been. The silence, after everything ended, felt different from before. Not empty, not uncertain, but settled. The kind of silence that comes when something broken finally stops shaking. A week after Daniel's arrest, I stood in my living room, sunlight pouring through the windows I had once stared at in fear of losing. Now, everything felt grounded again. Real. The house was legally confirmed to be mine. No disputes, no loopholes, no shadows left behind. Rachel had handled the final proceedings with her usual precision, cutting through every last complication Daniel had tried to leave behind. "Clean and untouchable," she had said, handing me the final documents. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Chloe didn't come back to the house after that day. Instead, she reached out a few days later, asking to meet somewhere neutral. We chose a quiet cafe near the waterfront. When I saw her, she looked like a different person, not because of what she wore, though her outfit was simpler now, no longer carefully curated, but because of the way she carried herself. The sharp confidence was gone, replaced by something quieter, honest. She looked tired, but not lost, just rebuilding. "I filed for divorce," she said after we sat down, her voice steady but soft. "I don't even know who I was married to." I studied her for a moment, seeing not the woman who had once stood at my door with a smug smile, but someone who had walked through the same illusion I once had. "You know now," I replied gently. She nodded. That was enough. Mrs. Whitmore became a constant presence in my life after everything settled. What started as concern turned into routine. Morning tea on my porch, quiet conversations about her late husband, stories she hadn't shared in years. At 68, she had a quiet resilience that only came from surviving loss without losing kindness. One afternoon, as we watered the hydrangeas together, she smiled at me and said, "You know, this house feels warmer now." And she was right. It wasn't just a place I had fought to keep anymore. It had become something I was choosing to grow in again. The story didn't end quietly outside our neighborhood either. Laura Mitchell's article ran on the front page of the Seattle Tribune, exposing the full extent of the fraud network. More victims came forward, more investigations opened, and Daniel's carefully constructed system collapsed faster than he ever expected. I read the article once, then closed it. Not out of avoidance, but because I didn't need it anymore. The truth had already done its work. A month later, I turned something unexpected into something intentional. With Rachel's help, I launched a small legal support service, Not a full firm, not yet, but a resource. A place where women who had been misled, manipulated, or pushed into silence could come for guidance before things spiraled. It started small, consultations, document reviews, but it grew quickly. Because stories like mine weren't rare, they were just often unheard. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft gold, I sat alone on my porch, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt fragile. I looked at the house, at the life inside it, at everything that had almost been taken, and realized something simple. I hadn't just kept this place. I had reclaimed myself. And this time, nothing about it felt temporary. So, what would you do if you were in my place? Would you fight for what's rightfully yours, or walk away to avoid the chaos? Trust someone who once betrayed you, or never give them a second chance? Expose the truth and risk everything, or stay silent and protect your peace? And if you were Chloe, would you keep defending the man you loved, or face the truth and start over? Because sometimes, the hardest choice isn't about winning or losing. It's about deciding who you become after everything falls apart. Tell me your choice in the comments. I really want to know where you stand. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this. Because some stories don't just entertain, they change the way you see the world.